Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of the Contrarian. We are delighted to have with us Senator Chris Van Hollen from the great state of Maryland. Welcome, Senator.
Jen, it's great to be with you.
And great to have you. You are the closest senator to us, along with your colleague, Senator Alsobrook. The rescission process. This obviously is a huge transfer of power from the legislature, which is supposed to make these choices, to the executive branch, whereupon Republicans rubber stamp this. Talk to us a little bit about, first of all, what's wrong with the process, but then the substance of what they decided to rescind yesterday.
Sure. Starting with the process, really this goes to the heart of the Constitution and separation of powers. And what Republicans in the Senate did just the other day is surrender a huge amount of their constitutional responsibility under Article 1, which gives Congress the power of the purse, to the president, to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump essentially had signed into law just a few months ago an appropriations bill, a spending bill that had been passed by the United States Senate on a bipartisan basis. He signed it. And now they come back the next day in a purely partisan way, take out things that apparently Trump doesn't like, but that members of the Senate and House had voted for, including Democrats. So this is really a double cross. And it makes it really difficult to proceed with sort of appropriations process if something we all agree on one day is undercut the next day. That's on the process. And we have to very much worry about this going forward because Russ Vought, who's the head of OMB, just said right afterwards, right after that happened, that he was going to do it again. And they're going to do it again and again. So, you know, some of the Republican senators who may have somehow convinced themselves that this was a one-off, it's never been intended to be a one-off.
Yeah.
On the damage done, and we can go into more details, but a lot of damage was done to people's ability to get information around the country, especially in rural areas, through these cuts to public TV and public radio. There are about 1,500 public radio stations and TV. A lot of them are going to go under. And this is a very important source of information to people. You know, Donald Trump, he says he coined the term fake news. He likes fake news, right? He likes news that only reports his distorted side of the story. He doesn't like it when people get real news, and public television really is dedicated, as is public radio, to delivering the facts and just the facts. Donald Trump doesn't want people to have the facts, and so this is a political vendetta against them. But a lot of people are going to be hurt because they are a very useful tool for giving people emergency notices. Like if you have a flood, like in Texas, or a hurricane or a natural disaster, in many areas, public radio especially is the means of communication. And if you turn that off, people's lives will literally be put at risk. So on the foreign assistance side, you know, people need to recognize that our foreign policy is multidimensional. You know, folks in the military, generals who have been around for a long time, when you ask them where we should invest more, the answer is not just the next weapon system. It's like, let's invest in diplomacy. Let's invest in development. They're called the 3Ds: defense, diplomacy, and development. And what the Trump administration is doing is taking a chainsaw to these other important instruments of our foreign policy. You know, when your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't just sit in your house, you go help them put it out. And you do that because it's the right thing to do, but you also do it because of the smart thing to do, because that fire may come hit you. One example, when we help people around the world avoid starvation, we save lives. When we help people around the world fight diseases, we also save lives, including lives in the United States of America, because diseases know no boundaries and they know how to jump across oceans. So just like when you want to go put out your neighbor's house, you want to do the right thing and help your neighbor, but you're also helping yourself. And there are many areas where they cut back on this. And I will end with this point here. Our adversaries, China, Russia, others, they're the big winners here.
Yes.
Because they will work to fill the vacuum over time. And the United States gets a lot of goodwill from these important investments, and that goodwill will disappear. People will feel betrayed, and they will turn to others, which is why this is called, this soft power has been a very important element of our foreign policy, and they're lighting it on fire. They started with Elon Musk, and now they're doing this.
Absolutely. Now, you are on the Appropriations Committee, and you had a meeting yesterday, just after the voting on the rescission. How did that go? Was there discussion about whether Republicans can, in good faith, negotiate something when the president could swoop in at any moment? Tell us about that meeting.
Yeah, so, right after we stayed up till about 3 a.m. in the morning and Republicans in the Senate passed this rescission bill, we had an appropriations meeting to work on the budget for the coming year, right? Fiscal year 26. And yes, Jen, we made the point that we really can't trust this process because the bills that we're working on in the Appropriations Committee for next year, Republicans could do the same double cross, right? We could all work this out and we can pass them and the president can sign them. And then Russ Vought and the president come in and say, let's get rid of these programs. We like these, but we don't like these, and let's cut them on a partisan basis. So we offered an amendment. Senator Merkley offered an amendment on the first bill we took up to essentially say that when it comes to military construction, right, this is a bipartisan account, helps our military, that we should make it clear that this is not subject to rescission. In other words, when we pass investments in military construction in this bill, President Trump and Republicans won't come around tomorrow after it's passed and say, well, we're going to cut these. They didn't agree to that. And so, I voted against this, not because of the substance in the bill. There's much to like in there, but because we need to send a message that Republicans need to stop supporting this process that attacks exactly what we've done. And then on a separate bill for those in this region, we went through a long, drawn-out bipartisan process for selecting a site for the future headquarters of the FBI.
Yes.
And as you know, Jen, it was a long process. There were 3 sites. This was not a pick by the Congress. It was a pick by the GSA, General Services Administration, the FBI. They identified 2 sites in Maryland, 1 in Virginia. There was a big competition. Greenbelt, Maryland won. And over the years, the Congress, on a bipartisan basis, has banked money that would be a down payment to help build a new headquarters in whichever site was selected. And what the Trump administration did was swoop in and seize the monies that had been set aside for that particular purpose and say, we want to use these monies instead to build out the FBI in the Ronald Reagan building, with no analysis of the security impacts or the mission requirements, none of that. We asked Republicans in the Senate to stand up for what had been the bipartisan congressional process and decisions. Unfortunately, fortunately, a week ago, I had a bipartisan bill pass amendment with Senator Murkowski, and they agreed that no money should be used to spend it on anything else other than the selected site. But yesterday, they came back and undid that process, which, as I pointed out, was a rescission in effect. I mean, that's a de facto rescission. It's the same thing that happened the night before for the $9 billion, because monies that Congress had appropriated set aside for one site was seized for another site. And so this is another element of breaking the system, breaking the appropriations process. And we're going to continue to fight for the FBI to come to Maryland, as was decided. But this showed the fact that everybody on the Republican side was willing to just fold for Donald Trump.
And when you think about this, it's remarkable. They were voting against a protection of Article 1 power, as if to say, well, we're voting for this, but we know we might not really mean it because the president might come in. So we're not going to put some belts and suspenders. It's like, come and get us. It is an amazing abrogation of authority and responsibility. I am curious because Susan Collins, who's the head of the appropriations, has always posited herself as a great appropriator, a great manager. Now, she didn't vote against rescission, but all of her colleagues, save one, voted in favor of it. What is her job now? Does she have any explanation? Does she defend this process?
Well, you're absolutely right. She's the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and she repeatedly says that she supports this bipartisan process. And as you indicated, she did vote against the rescissions package, but there were also lots of amendments along the way that would have reduced the harm of the rescissions package that Republican senators voted against. But at some point, you know, they really need to have this discussion with their own members, because, you know, what we have is a situation where Republican senators decide who's going to vote for a package or not in a way that has, whenever it has no consequence, right? They always arrange, they always arrange it with few exceptions. So there's never 4 Republican senators to vote, you know, in this case, against something. And of course, that's what we need in order to defeat something. So there is this whole shell game going on when it comes to voting. And the bottom line is that, you know, people need to call out what's happening here, which is that the Republican Party has become the cult of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is running the show for Republicans in the Senate and in the House. And that's just what's happening. And I don't know why people want to be there if they're just casting votes out of fear rather than exercising independent judgment. I mean, what is the point of running for the Congress?
Exactly. A nice title and a nice expense account and a nice office, I suppose. But you are so right about this shell game, whether it was on the rescission or whether it was on the big, awful, ugly bill. It's all very orchestrated. I will end on this because, of course, you made that tremendous trip to El Salvador to visit with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who they have now come up with a very suspiciously thin criminal charge, which seems to be based on witnesses who are criminals, and they don't quite have a lot of facts there. What's your understanding of where things stand with him, and how concerned are you that they literally have just concocted a criminal case because they wanted to save themselves the embarrassment of having to reverse course and bring this person home?
Well, right. So when you say home, you mean back to Maryland. They did have to reverse course even when they said they never would by bringing him back to the United States, right?
Yes.
You had Donald Trump, you had the Attorney General, you had others. We're never bringing him back, which was a total violation of his due process rights under the Constitution. 9-0 Supreme Court decision. And many of us highlighted the fact that this was a brazen disregard for the rule of law. So they were forced to bring him back. But to your point, when they brought him back, they didn't want to, they were worried that they would look really bad if they did let him go back to Maryland. So they came up with a new charge that had never been made against him. This human smuggling charge, which Abrego Garcia contests. But to your point, their main witness in this case is somebody who had a serial criminal record, who was being detained, who was about to be deported. And all of a sudden, the guy gets released and is given a work permit. There's a guy, again, with a criminal record, in order to testify in support of the government's case against Abrego Garcia in Tennessee. And as you probably saw reported, one of the prosecutors, the career prosecutors down in Tennessee, quit. Now, we haven't seen a public statement, but the timing was coincident with this. Meanwhile, the concern of Abrego Garcia and his family and his lawyers is if he gets out on bail, then immediately the immigration folks will come in and scoop him up and send him to some third country. So we have the very unusual situation where his team actually wants him to stay in prison for a little more, Meanwhile, Judge Zinnes, and you follow these things, but it is
Yes.
who's a Maryland District Court judge, is essentially been questioning the administration about their intentions. Like, are you going to give him an hour to be able to go before another judge or immigration judge to contest the deportation? And they haven't made that commitment. So the bottom line is that we've seen an incredible amount of abusive process from the Attorney General, specifically making all sorts of claims in public that they didn't bring before the court. My view all along has been we need to get the system and this charges in the courts. They are there, but you know, if you're not willing to say something under penalty of perjury in the court of law, don't go out on social media and do all this. So this is fundamental, as you know, Jen, to the rule of law, to our Constitution. And I will say on this case and the other efforts you mentioned, you know, all the other detentions, what Donald Trump is doing now is not focusing on people who pose a public safety risk. I mean, these are not people who have criminal records. I mean, they are focused on people who in many cases have lived in our communities for decades. They've been contributing positively to our communities, and they're just disappearing now. And it's really outrageous that all of us as Americans, regardless of party, should be extremely disturbed. And it does appear that the public, which understandably, and I agree, believes in strong border security, which I agree with, but they don't believe in this just masked agents rounding people up who pose no record. It will get worse because the terrible bill, the big bad, you know, betrayal of a bill, in addition to cutting taxes for very rich people and corporations and cutting Medicaid that will throw millions and millions of Americans off of healthcare, also has this substantial boost in monies for ICE and for detention centers and even Rand Paul. Some people may miss this. Rand Paul, who chairs the committee overseeing Homeland Security, said that's too much money. We don't need that money. But they did it run around him. So this is a really hard moment for all of us who believe in our Constitution and the rule of law. Can I say one thing about the deficit situation?
Yes, please.
Because
since it's gotten a lot worse.
I have to say, Jen, that when we did this rescission bill just this week, $9 billion, to hear a parade of Republican senators come down to the floor and say, we've got to pass this rescission bill because we've got to reduce our deficit and debt, was really nauseating, right? Because it was just 2 weeks before that they increased our national debt by $4 trillion.
Yes.
$4 trillion. And what they did the other day represents 0.23 of 1% of the additional debt that they just added to America's credit card. So for them to come down to the floor of the Senate and say, you know what, we've got to cut public radio and get rid of, you know, these important emergency notices. We got to get rid of Big Bird, or we've got to cut funds that we help literally to save lives around the world and prevent the spread of diseases, because we now care about the deficit debt, is just so nauseating. And I really hope the American public is paying attention here, because it is the ultimate of hypocrisy, and it just was a spectacle that was hard to stomach. But I did want to mention that.
Absolutely, and I think what we're seeing is a festival of bad faith, bad constitutional law, and really fundamental dishonesty about what is going on. But we thank you, Senator. You've been a tremendous voice on all of these. We look forward to having you help educate the public as the summer recess approaches. And that is a good time, of course, for constituents to talk to their lawmakers and ask them what's going on. So we hope they take advantage of that. But thank you, and thank you for joining us. And we hope to have you back soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for launching this important conversation.